Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Michelle Aubin and Linda Lang.
Hi, it is Linda Lang here from ThoughtChange.com, and you're watching Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. I'm here today with a guest, Helen Elizabeth Evans, a leading expert in the UK on hand analysis. This week, Michelle is not able to join us as she's deep in the throes of a business project. So Helen and I are going to have a fantastic conversation. Helen, please say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I am really passionate about scientific hand and fingerprint analysis, and which is what Linda was mentioning. I'm known in the UK as the #1 for doing that, and I've been lucky enough to be featured on TV and radio and in a number of magazines for the work that I do. And I think the reason why is because the work that I do is so powerful, and I don't actually think that it's me. It's very much about actually just revealing to people what's actually in their own hands about their path. And my big passion in life really is about getting people back onto their spiritual path. And so that's kind of why I just absolutely love what I do.
That's fantastic. And one of my passions too. I mean, it's so rewarding when you get people more on track. And I find the whole idea of hand analysis really interesting, Helen. I've had a little bit of a blurb once upon a time, but to think that your characteristics and perhaps your life purpose is written in your hands is amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I started searching for my purpose. I think, we all have, you'll hear from my accent. I don't know whether you can tell from accents, but I actually, although I live in Britain and I live in London, in the UK, I actually grew up in Africa. And from a very young age, I always had this, I don't know, there's just this knowing, this kind of feeling that we all have a purpose. And, and then I would go, of course, what do we do? A lot of us, we like to resist our purpose, don't we? We kind of go, no, I'm not going to follow my instinct. I'm not going to follow my flow. I'm going to do what feels safe because it's what my family does or what my local society does, or, the people in my environment do. My teachers say I should do this. And you just kind of constantly ignore that inner calling within you because it seems dangerous, and it seems like it won't fit into what society requires of you. And certainly when I was quite young, the careers were still quite traditional. I mean, now you can just do anything and make money from it, which is amazing, which I think is so freeing. But there was always this thing of like, why am I here? What's my point? And especially the more I experience challenges in my life, the more I might be rejected, or the more I might fail at something or whatever, you start to feel like, what's the point? What's the point that I actually exist? And so always seeking was always underneath that question was, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? What am I here to do? And of course, I kept getting messages. I knew what I was here to do. I was told when I was 6, I'm here to help people honor their heavenly commitments. And, but you ignore these messages that you get, these knowings that you get, that you're given, these signs that you're given over and over again. And I do remember actually being given a palmistry book when I was about 14 or so. And I was really fascinated by it, but I played with it a bit, and I kind of thought, I don't know, this is not for me. It didn't appeal to my really intellectual kind of brain in a way. I thought it was a little too all over the place. And then when I was much older and I went through a number of challenges, as we all do, and was forced to kind of, go a bit more down my path, I discovered scientific hand fingerprint analysis. And the bizarre thing is, it's funny when you are actually fulfilling your purpose, because you just get these just knowings where you just have to do something, right? And I remember doing this and going, I know this is it. This is it. And I'm going to go and learn how to do this. And the reason why was because for the first time, the pragmatic side of my brain was being satisfied by the fact that it's in my fingerprints. It's actually in my body. It makes sense, right? And I'll explain as we go on why I think that's really, really valid. But also that spiritual side of me, that sort of more metaphysical side of me, that intuitive side of me was being satisfied at the same time with both of them. And I'm one of these people that I don't believe everything I hear and see. I like to kind of see some pragmatic application, or shall we say we need to take our spiritual selves and our spiritual knowing into the practical world, because we are actually here to be spiritual beings who are having a practical, real world experience. It's not about ignoring our current lives in any form or fashion. It's not about ignoring our current circumstances. It's about transcending them and using them as a, I guess I want to say, if you imagine that your life is a little bit like your soul put you here and gave you a canvas, and your life is the canvas and the paint and the paints that you were given to create something with. To paint a picture, to create some amazing artistic accomplishment. You need to look at your life like that. And the thing is that, you know, I might have a rectangular canvas in front of me, and you might have a round canvas in front of you, and maybe you've only got stones and leaves and glue to make your picture with, whereas maybe I've got crayons to make mine with, and I'm desperate to have watercolors, but I don't have any watercolors. I've only got crayons. And we just have to live the life with what we have and make the most creative and beautiful piece of artwork with our lives as we possibly can. And so I wanted something that for me reflected, or this is what fingerprint analysis is so powerful for me, is because I feel that it takes the practical, you know, it has that practical aspect and has that spiritual aspect, and puts the two together into a really, and allows you to actually paint your picture better, shall we say.
So I'm in total agreement with you about bringing that spiritual energy down here in this 3-dimension world and grounding it here and improving this world. You probably know people, I know people myself that are very spiritual, but they kind of go out of body and go up and, you know, instead of bringing that energy down. So I'm actually very much like you, Helen. I like to be practical and know that what I'm doing is impacting my life and the lives of the people around me. So is there something in your hand that says that? It's funny that you're like that and I'm like that.
You probably have some, well, actually, does it actually bring the two together in the hands? I think, okay, so what the hands tell you, there are two aspects to the hands. So on the one level, you have like the major lines you can see in your hands. Let me just turn it, just see. Major sort of like lines, which are the obvious. So this is the heart line, that's the head line, that's the life line. You know, for most people, they have those 3 major lines. And you have other superficial lines on your hands, etc. You have the shape of your hands, you have the length of your fingers, the shapes of it. All of this informs your personality. And I'm a great believer that our soul gives us a personality through which we are here to express our creativity and learn what we're here to learn. But then you have the fingerprints, which are and those lines and that hand shape and also stuff, they can all change depending on what is going on in your life. I mean, bizarrely enough, I've actually seen people whose fingers have grown, like one finger has grown longer than the other finger. It's weird, but that changes. But your fingerprints, you'll find fingerprints on the palm of your hand too. That doesn't. Even if you burnt your whole hand off and everything kind of grew back and healed, the patterns of those dermatoglyphs, which are your fingerprints, would actually grow back exactly the same. Now that's your soul plan. So your soul plan is, I want to actually express the soul plan through the personality that might be shown in my hands.
Now, I had someone once upon a time tell me that one hand was kind of what you were born with, and one hand was what you were doing with what you were born with. Is that accurate?
Well, we look at it a little bit differently with scientific hand and fingerprint analysis. What we discovered is, you know, your right hand is often the hand that you shake the hand of people, especially in the Western world. It's the hand that we put forward first. We shake the hand of a person to greet them, to greet the world with. So we talk about this hand being how we show up in the world, how we show up in public, how we show up with people who don't really know us that well. With our left hand, it's how we show up in private, how we show up in our personal lives, with people who we actually know quite well. And often they're quite different. I mean, it's fascinating to actually look at two people's hands and I'll say, oh, you like to be in charge at work, but at home you want everybody to tell you how fabulous you are. And people just stare at me and go, oh my God, how do you know that?
There are no secrets. There are no
secrets when you look at your hands. Absolutely. I mean, I've got a very well-known newspaper here today. Have got me actually looking at Harry and Meghan's hands. because they want to know, because everybody apparently is Googling, do they want to have a baby? And I'm like, or when are they going to get pregnant? And I'm thinking, really, who's got time to sit and Google about whether somebody else is going to get pregnant or not? But okay, if you want me to look at their hands, I'll do that, because that's the amazing thing, is you can actually look at people's photographs of people's hands and tell so much about them. So when I'm sitting and I'm talking to you, even without actually knowing about your fingerprints, right, I could probably tell a lot about you if we were sitting personally, in terms of the way that you move your hands, what the type of hands you have, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's fascinating. Isn't that an amazing thing, that you do all of these personality profiling tests, and all of them are so subjective, based on, answer these 4 questions. Which do you prefer? And if you're in a good mood, you answer one way, and if you're a bit of a bad mood, you answer another way. They slightly, they vary slightly depending on what's going on in your lives. Your fingerprints, that's it. Never changes.
I find that.
Who you are.
I find that with like Enneagram or most of the personality quizzes that you take, which is why I much prefer astrology, human design, and hand analysis.
Yes. Thank you.
Exactly. Because when you're at the top of your emotional curve, how you answer those questions can be very different when you're at the bottom of it.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Absolutely. If you're feeling good about yourself, isn't it? I'm always fascinated by how, if we are feeling like we are enough, that we are feeling good about what we've done, if we've just had a win in our lives, and then something happens. It might be something, it could be anything that happens. It could be a person who knocks at the door and is grumpy and grumpily tries to sell you something, say. If I'm in a good mood, the way that I handle that person and the way that I deal with that person is so different to if actually I'm feeling really low about myself and feeling bad about myself. So I always kind of notice that, and I go, actually, it's my job in this world to always feel good about myself, because I respond better to the world and I treat the people around me so much better if I feel good about me.
Absolutely. Know thyself and love thyself, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm a little curious, Helen, because you say fingerprints can change, but...
No, not fingerprints.
No, not fingerprints.
Yeah, the lines on your hands, but not fingerprints.
Okay, because I was curious as to injuries. Let's say someone, has a cut. Does that shift things in their personality?
No. But what it often will tell you is actually at the time of the life that they actually injured themselves. I'll give you an example. Okay, this is a weird example. This doesn't normally happen to my clients. This is a very unusual situation, but I'll give you an example of something that just happened last week. I have clients that either I see virtually or who come and see me in person. And this lady's mother had come to see me before because she's fascinated by this kind of work. She's on a spiritual journey herself. And, my job ultimately is to actually get people back on their path and assist them in taking the steps they need to on their spiritual journey. And then I help them to create a business, which is often a reflection of that spirit or of their purpose, shall we say. A business that allows them to express their purpose and do the work that they're here to do in the world and get money back for doing it. So therefore her mother was the perfect client for that kind of thing, but she was so blown away by her experience, she actually paid for her daughter to come and see me. And often when somebody comes to see me without actually paying for it themselves or choosing to do it themselves, sometimes what happens is often quite different because they might be in a very different place. And what was fascinating that came out of in her fingerprints was it was really all about powerlessness, and her life lesson was really about her not fully embracing her power. There's a lot of other stuff that came out. And then truth, Bob, as we're talking about this, she gets a photograph. She gets messaged a photograph from her nanny who was looking after her daughter. She was a temporary nanny or whatever it is, to say that her daughter had just cut her power finger. Massively cut it in. She showed, I was like, oh my God, she should, if that was my child, I'd be rushing back home. And she's sitting there. But actually her whole pattern was to constantly give her power away to take care of everybody else. And there her daughter was cutting her power finger, the feminine, powerless again. She should actually, as a mother, should be again giving up her power and running to take care of her daughter. She was being asked by her soul, she was being put in exactly the situation that basically was her life lesson for her to make a choice. And she made a choice to call her dad, who was a pathologist and obviously as a result trained doctor, to go and take care of it instead. in our session. But can you see how the finger that you damaged, I mean, it was fascinating. There was her daughter who was experiencing that. But often if a person actually, I mean, my husband, when he was, I think he was about 12 or 14, he has a brother who's much older than him, and his brother smashed his finger in the door, and his little finger has a certain section missing. And that section of the finger, it represented at that time his ideas, you know what I mean? What he wanted was not being listened to. He wasn't being heard in the house because he was the little one and he was constantly being put upon, etc., etc. So the damage that occurred, what matters is when the damage occurred and what was actually going on. It's usually a reflection on a subconscious level. You damage the finger that relates to the issue that you are struggling with at that time that you create the damage.
That is such an interesting story, Helen, because I too have injured my little pinky finger, and I show you. Look at it. Can you see? I can't make it straight.
Oh goodness!
Because I've torn the tendon, and this actually happened at a Journey Circle. That it was a series that I had enrolled in, and I love shamanic journeying. I love the inner world. It's so rich, and the journeys sounded so good. And each week I would go, and I would be like, wow, it doesn't feel right. It must be me, right? It must be something about me, instead of thinking this wasn't the circle for me or the series for me. And then one day I went to lie down. I lay on the floor when I journey. I was in group. I lay down and I jammed my finger, and it's just like totally flopped. And it was like, okay. So one of the other participants offered to drive me to the hospital, and miraculously we were in and out in like 20 minutes because it was a shift change. But I knew right then it was because I was not listening to my own guidance, that this wasn't the place where I was supposed to be. And instead I was trying to create some kind of internal issue that needed to be solved, where, sometimes it's just not where you're supposed to be.
Exactly. Well, maybe what would be useful for your listeners is just to talk about what each finger represents. Then if they've got an injury, they can connect. Now, obviously, I can only tell you very broadly, but if they came to me with an injury, I could probably give them a bit more clarity. But your little finger does represent communication. And your left finger is communication with yourself, like your internal communication, your intuition, your internal guidance, intimacy with yourself. And intimacy with others as well, your vulnerability, etc. Your left hand is very much outer communication. I'm not feeling heard by anyone in the world. There's no point in me speaking up because nobody listens anyway. I'm not very good at communicating. Usually great communicators, they just communicate. They just need to learn how to communicate slightly differently in order to to be heard, shall we say. Then these fingers are creativity. Your ring finger is your creativity, right? Hence love, represents love. You put your wedding ring on the finger of love and creativity. The one at home is very much the left-hand one is very much the innovator. Am I willing to be different? Am I willing to be unique? And the problem that often comes with that one is that there's a huge fear of rejection, especially by your peers. And so often we will damage that finger, for instance, if we are in that state of, oh my God, I'm so full of fear of rejection, or that people won't like me, or people won't admire me the way that I want to be admired. The other finger is very much about being in the spotlight, being creative and expressing yourself, and actually getting appreciation and applause for it. And so sometimes, and what is creativity but your uniqueness, your individuality, right? And so if you damage that finger, it's like, can I be seen? Am I being seen enough that I need to be seen? Or do I feel like nobody ever really sees me or sees how unique and special I am? I feel not special. I feel, and sometimes it can manifest itself as feeling quite apathetic too, because you feel like you're not special enough to actually warrant any particular attention. Then the middle finger represents value. I mean, that rude sign where you kind of like put this finger up, etc., etc. Well, I want to tell you that is about the fact that this finger represents value. So if you're turning around and you're pulling that sign to somebody, instead of it actually saying the rude words that usually go with it, what you're actually saying is, I don't value you. Which is really kind of an interesting idea. So anyway, the left one is about self-worth, valuing yourself. And it's also very much about your own personal integrity. So if you are out of alignment and you are trying to do things that you should do versus like actually what is true for you and what feels right for you, then perhaps you could have injured that finger at that time that you're behaving that way. Whereas this finger is very much self-worth, but in terms of how you show up in the world, like as in, how do I manage my money? Am I getting paid enough? Am I valuing my time? Am I valuing my resources? We talked a little bit about efficiency. It was kind of like, am I being sufficiently efficient? But it all relates ultimately back to value. Am I also valuing other people and valuing their time and valuing what they give me? It's all about value in the world versus value at home. And then in the left hand again, this is your power finger. So value at home would be things like my personal power, good boundaries, taking responsibility for my life, not being the victim. Now, if you feel like the victim and you feel like actually it's always everybody else is causing everything to happen in your life and your life is not going particularly well, that might be, you might damage that finger at that time, or maybe one of your life lessons. It can also be that, life is boring. I mean, I'll be honest with you, life is boring usually when we don't do anything. But when we're in that state of boredom, we don't realize that the reason why we're bored is because we're just actually doing nothing. We're waiting to get excited first. Well, actually, the excitement often comes after you take action. But anyway, then the other finger is very much about your power in the world. So your leadership, your entrepreneurial skills, your vision. Do you have a vision for what's possible for you, for your life? How's your self-belief? This finger represents your self-belief, and if you're struggling with your self-belief, you can possibly, this is a typical finger for people to damage, especially women, because we are not that comfortable with our power. We always feel like perhaps we should be a little bit helpless. Perhaps we should be a little overwhelmed, because actually that's what so many of the role models around us are like, right? So we often damage that finger. I mean, I think as a child, which finger was it that I did? I actually, funny enough, my personal power, I virtually cut. I grew up in a sugar estate in Africa and in Swaziland, and I was trying to cut the sugar cane, and I virtually cut my finger off. And of course, this represents my personal power as a child. I felt like my power was, I felt like I didn't have any personal power. Like everybody else was telling me what to do the whole time. Isn't it interesting that I virtually cut that finger off in the process? And then your thumbs represent, the one on the left is your ability, your sense of community. Where do I belong? Your family. Do you feel like the odd one out, or do you feel like you belong somewhere? And often when we don't feel like we belong, we will hurt ourselves on this thumb or something like that. We feel like the odd woman out, so to speak. Or this finger, which is your ability to get results. It's like, am I always failing? If you feel like a failure, or you're not finishing things, or you're getting very frustrated a lot of the times, often you'll hurt yourself like this. I mean, often the top of this finger this thumb is a fascinating one for us to actually damage. But actually, the thumb represents your ability to get results in the world. And so you do feel as if you're not getting the results that you want to get, you can damage that.
That's amazing that you can tell all of that just from fingers.
Yeah. That's where the different energy is represented in your body. Your fingers represent the different energy. I mean, you can look at stuff like, you can show, look at your fingers and see there's like an arch here with our fingers, right?
Yes.
So, but what's really fascinating is often noticing when we actually have it's almost like a little bit of a platform that we've created underneath one finger. It can almost be like this sort of a shape that fits under, and then the finger goes. Like it's almost like we've added some extra padding underneath the finger, the shape of it. You can imagine it like a little platform. That's usually because we put a lot more energy into whatever that finger represents than we might have done. So often people will have these fingers here, typically the value and the power finger. They will have put a lot of energy into them. And these fingers will be fatter, they'll be stronger looking, they'll be stand taller. And these will be like, oh my God, starved. you know. It's like I'm not really doing much of my intimacy work. I'm not really actually showing up much in the world, you know. And I'm just fascinated when I look at people's hands when they're not kind of balanced, because it's always really fascinating to look at your hands and kind of go, actually, now everybody has the, you know, the little finger is smaller than the other fingers, etc. But just look at your hands in general and just kind of go, okay, so where's the lack of balance? Where's the lack of energy? Which one really stands out as half starved? And which one looks like it's actually being fed a lot? And that tells you where you are currently putting your energy into things.
It's kind of like a little secret weapon you have.
It does give you enormous insights about people. It really does.
I think it's
but I never presume. I always say to people, you know, this is what I'm seeing in your hands. You need to acknowledge for yourself whether it's true or not.
The other thing, just before we wrap up, that I'd like to let the listeners know is that there are also gift markers in your hand. So if you're not sure what gifts you've come into this life with, having your hand analysis done is one way to discover them.
Yeah, and you can find out not necessarily about the gift markers, but you can actually find out a lot more about some of the stuff I've been talking about on my Facebook page, which is called Hands-on-Business. And I think you'll pop the URL in below the video. And if you go there, there's a number of different videos. They're very relaxed, chatty. The intention is not to create some slick professional thing. It's really about people joining in and asking questions and me answering them there and then. So you can join me live, usually on Wednesdays around about 6 o'clock UK time, depending on where you are in the world. Just look for London time. But otherwise, just go and look at the recordings and go and, look at your own hands and relax, in reference to the recordings.
Fantastic, Helen. Thank you so much for being our guest here on Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. It's been
Thank you
an
so
absolute
much.
pleasure. All right, we'll talk to you again soon. Okay? Bye, everyone.
Bye.